Hi, Ms Ebert's class. We're going to finish Christmas in Camelot. Chapter 14, Return. Okay, now I should start the page before. Sorry. The iron gate slowly swung open. Sir Lancelot urged the horse onward. The guards watched silently as the knights passed by them and started across the bridge. The three horses trod in single file over the wooden planks. Again, Jack was amazed by the difference between this world and the other world. Here it was dark and freezing and foggy. The red cloak flapped in the bitter wind. As the horses stepped off the bridge, they each neighed loudly. "Oh, wow," whispered Annie. Standing high on a rock in a swirl of fog was the white stag. Chapter 14, Return. The three knights gazed in wonder at the white stag. "Here, take this," Annie said to Jack. She handed him the silver cup. She slipped off the back of Lancelot's horse and rang to the stag. "Thanks for coming for us," she cried, throwing her arms around him. The three knights looked at Jack. "That's the white stag," said Jack. "He brought us here." "Are you wizards?" Sir Percival asked in a hushed voice. "No, just ordinary kids," said Jack. "But I know he's magic. We got here from Camelot in no time at all. I guess he's come to take us back." "Then you must go with him," said Sir Lancelot. "You will have a much faster journey, I can assure you." Sir Lancelot held the silver cup as Jack slipped down from the black horse. Then Jack took the cup and carefully climbed onto the back of the stag with Annie. He held the cup with both hands as the stag stood up. "Tell King Arthur we will return to Camelot before the first night of the new year," said Sir Lancelot. "Farewell, Jack and Annie," said Sir Galahad. "Godspeed," said Sir Percival. "Same to you," said Annie. "Have a safe trip." The knights solemnly bowed. The white stag blew a puff of frosty air, then he started down the mountainside. When the stag came to the base of the mountain, he took off again like a white comet. The red cloak billowed around Jack and Annie, keeping them warm and safe. The stag dashed across the wintry fields. He ran past quiet stables and thatched huts. He ran past flocks of sheep and herds of goats asleep in the meadow. He leapt over frozen streams and stone walls and hedge groves. The stag ran on and on through the starry night until he brought Jack and Annie back to the dark castle grounds of Camelot. He walked over the frozen grass of the outer courtyard. He came to a halt near the grove below the treehouse. He knelt in the grass. Jack and Annie climbed off his back. Miraculously, the silver cup still brimmed with water from the cauldron. Not a drop had spilled. "We better leave the cloak here," said Jack, "so I don't trip on it." Jack carefully set the cup on the ground. Annie helped him unbutton the velvet cloak from around his neck. Then she draped it over the stag's back. "To keep you warm and safe," she whispered to him, "and thanks for everything." "Yeah, thanks," said Jack. "Goodbye." The white stag stared at them with his mysterious amber eyes. He nodded once. Then he turned and headed into the darkness. Jack picked up the cup. "Come on," he said. He started walking quickly through the outer courtyard. "Careful, careful," said Annie. I got it," said Jack. They crossed the drawbridge into the inner courtyard of the castle. Then they pushed open the giant arched doorways. The great hall was just as they had left it, dimly lit and freezing cold. King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and the Knights of the Round Table, and Morgan were still all frozen and silent. "What do we do now?" said Jack. "Let's try putting a drop of water on each of them. Morgan first," she said. "Okay, come on." Holding his breath and keeping his eyes on the cup, Jack walked carefully towards the round table. Suddenly, his left foot stepped on the shoelace of his right sneaker and he stumbled. "Jack!" yelled Annie. Jack tried to regain his balance, but it was too late. He fell to the floor, and the silver cup slipped from his hands. Chapter 15. Christmas Magic. Jack and Annie watched in horror as the water from the cup splashed over the stone floor. It trickled into the cracks between the stones and disappeared. Jack scrambled to the cup. He picked it up. It was completely empty. "Oh no," Jack moaned. He sat back and put his head in his hands. Camelot will never wake up now, he thought. The legend will end forever. "Jack," said Annie, "look." Jack raised his head, pushed his glasses into place. A golden cloud was rising from the cracks between the stone of the floor. The cloud spread quickly throughout the great hall, filling the room with wonderful smells, the scent of cedar smoke, evergreen, of roses and almonds. The cloud rose up and up, then wafted out through the upper windows of the hall. Suddenly, a white dove flew through one of the windows. It soared across the dark room like a bright light, then swooped back out into the night. Soft, gentle laughter came from the end of the hall. Then the laughter grew louder. Jack saw King Arthur and Queen Guinevere looking at each other. They were laughing. The knights of the Round Table were laughing too. Best of all, Jack saw Morgan smile at him and Annie. "Jack, Annie, come here," she called. She held out her arms. "Morgan!" cried Annie. She ran to Morgan and threw her arms around her. Jack stood up, still holding the empty cup. He ran to Morgan and hugged her. "You did what the Christmas night told us to do," said Annie. "We brought back the water of memory and imagination." "But I dropped the cup," said Jack, "and spilled all the water." "But the water made a gold cloud," said Annie, "and everyone came back to life." Morgan laughed with amazement. "You have just returned from the other world?" she asked. "Yes," said Annie. "The white stag brought us back," said Jack. He turned to King Arthur. "Your Majesty," he said, "we have good news. Your knights are safe. Sir Lancelot said to tell you they will be home before the first night of the new year." The king looked bewildered. "You found them?" "Yes, and they're all fine," said Annie. "Here," said Jack. He handed the silver cup to the king. "Please give this back to Sir Galahad." "And this is Sir Lancelot's," said Annie. She took the key from around her neck and gave it to King Arthur. "Oh, and this is Sir Percival's," said Jack. He pulled the wooden compass box from his pack and gave it to the king. At first, King Arthur was too stunned to speak. Then he clapped his hands and laughed joyfully. "Thank you," he said to Jack and Annie. The knights of the Round Table all cheered. "Ring the bells," King Arthur shouted. "Call the people of Camelot to the castle." "They have already gathered outside the door, Your Majesty," said a page. "Bring 'em in," said King Arthur. "We must rejoice together." Queen Guinevere smiled at Jack and Annie. Her eyes sparkled now. "Once again, you have helped save Camelot. Thank you very much." "You're welcome," said Jack and Annie together. Then Jack heard the sounds of children talking and laughing. He turned to see a crowd of people streaming through the arched doorway of the great hall. They carried candles, a giant fir tree, and bogs of holly and pine. Musicians followed them with stringed instruments. As everyone started to decorate the hall, the musicians began to play and singing a beautiful Christmas carol. "Jack," said Annie, "look." The white stag was standing at the arched doorway. Jack turned excitedly to Morgan. "See, that's the white stag," he said. "He took us to the other world. See him?" Morgan smiled. "Yes, I do see him," she said. "And now I see everything." Jack looked back at the doorway. The stag was gone. In his place stood an old man with a long white beard. He held a staff and wore a flowing red cloak, the same cloak Jack and Annie had worn on their quest. "Who's that?" Jack asked. "That is Merlin the magician," said Morgan. "It was Merlin who invited you here. I see that now." "Merlin," said Jack. "He sent us the royal invitation?" "Yes," said Morgan. "Then he put the rest of us under a spell, and he carried you to the other world." "No," said Annie, "the Christmas night put you under a spell." "And the white stag carried us to the other world," said Jack. Morgan smiled. "Merlin was both the Christmas night and the white stag," she said. "Remember, he's a magician, not a mortal. He can change his shape whenever he wishes." "Oh, wow," whispered Annie. "Why did Merlin do these things?" asked Jack. "Merlin was angry at when King Arthur banished magic from Camelot," said Morgan. "I see now he finally took matters into his own hands." "How?" asked Jack. "He knew King Arthur would send no more knights to the other world for the water of memory and imagination," said Morgan. "So I assume he brought you to Camelot, hoping that you would offer to go instead." "Why did he want us to go?" asked Annie. "Merlin has often heard my tales of your adventures in the treehouse," said Morgan. "He knows you both have a great desire to fight for the good, and he knows you use the gift of imagination very well. Those are two special qualities needed to succeed in any quest." Jack and Annie looked back at Merlin. From across the room, the white-bearded magician smiled at them. He raised his staff, then he slipped out the door. Jack looked around the great hall. All the candles and torches were lit now. A fire blazed in the hearth. The musicians were playing. Everyone was singing. The room glowed with warm firelight and rosy faces. At last, Christmas in Camelot was just as Jack had imagined it would be. The spell of the dark wizard had been broken. The great hall was filled with beauty and love and joy and light. Chapter 16. Welcome home. "Wake up, Jack," said Annie. Jack opened his eyes. He was lying in the dark on the wooden floor of the treehouse. Through the window he saw a cloudy sky above Frog Creek Woods. "Time to go home," said Annie. "Oh, I must have fallen asleep," said Jack. "I had the most incredible dream. I dreamed that we went to Camelot. It was Christmas, and Merlin—" "That wasn't a dream," said Annie. "It was real. You fell asleep at the round table during the party. King Arthur carried you to the treehouse, and I made the wish for us to come home." Jack sat up. "Seriously?" he whispered. "Seriously," she said. "Jack! Annie!" their mother called in the distance. "Coming!" Annie shouted out the treehouse window. She turned to Jack. "Let's go." "I mean, seriously, it really happened?" Jack asked Annie again. "Yes, really," she said. She held up the royal invitation. "See? Proof." "Oh, yeah," he whispered. "This time the M stood for Merlin, not Morgan," said Annie. Jack smiled. "Thanks, Merlin," he said softly. He picked up his backpack. Then he and Annie started down the rope ladder and headed home. As they walked through the deep December twilight, snowflakes started to fall. By the time they left the woods and headed down their street, snow was swirling everywhere. Ahead, they could see their house glowing in the lamplight. Their mom was waiting on the front porch. "Hi, Mom," said Annie. "Hi, Mom," said Jack. "Hey, kids. Did you have a great day?" she asked. "Yes," said Jack. "Pretty good," said Annie. "I'm glad," their mother said. "Welcome home." She held the door open, and Jack and Annie went inside. Their house felt extra warm and cozy. Good smells came from the kitchen. Jack and Annie took off their snow-covered jackets, then headed up the stairs. In the hallway, Annie turned to Jack. "Merry Christmas," he said. "Merry Christmas," she said. Annie slipped into her room and Jack into his. Jack closed the door and sat on his bed. He took his notebook out of his pack and opened it. His spirits sank. Except for the 3 rhymes, he had taken no notes on their journey, not one. Exhausted, Jack lay back on his bed. He squeezed his eyes shut. He tried to remember the details of their adventure in Camelot and the other world. He could feel the terrible chill in that great hall when Morgan was frozen. He could hear the joyful music as the winged dancers danced around in circles. He could taste the sweet, bitter, spicy taste of the water of memory and imagination. Jack sat up. All at once, he felt very awake. He turned to a clean page in his notebook, grabbed his pencil, and wrote. It all started when we saw the white dove in the twilight. Using his memory and imagination, Jack kept writing, doing his part to keep the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin and Morgan, alive. As the snow swirled outside his window, Jack wrote and wrote and wrote. He didn't stop writing until he'd written down the whole story, his story of their Christmas in Camelot. And that is the end of Christmas in Camelot. I hope you guys really, really liked it. Tomorrow we're going to start a new book just for your class. See you tomorrow.